Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Ben Edwards, and today I will be your guide in this virtual tour of Skara Brae. This tour is built to express the site in an archaeological context. Therefore, our tour will involve applying our knowledge of Skara Brae to current archaeological theory. Skara Brae is a Neolithic village located at Orkney's main isle in the Bay of Scale. The Orkneys are renowned for being a unique location of Neolithic history, which includes sites that define what we know of prehistoric Europe. According to Orca, the Orkney Research Centre for Archaeology, there are over 3,000 archaeological sites on the Isles, of which many of them are Neolithic in origin. With that said, we can see why such a site like Skara Brae, a complete Neolithic village of this time, is a centre point for debates in the academic community. This tour, therefore, seeks to compare virtual examples of the site and discuss theories and thoughts regarding the Neolithic era. Discovered in 1850, Skara Brae was first thought to be a burial mound, until a powerful storm removed top layers from sand on top of it to reveal structures. The site was excavated by a local lord called William Watt of Scale, whom discovered 4 of the 10 buildings. Sadly, it was falsely labelled as an Iron Age village due to a lack of research and methodology in archaeology at the time. In 1913, the site was raided by locals for any artefacts they could find, which stripped 4 of the houses discovered bare of any potential discoveries. In 1925, another storm hit Orkney and damaged Skara Brae, which led to the decision to record and protect the site from future concerns. As a result, a large sea wall was made to buffer the village from the sea, and Vere Gordon Child was contracted by the British Museum to excavate the site. His excavations took place in 1927, which led to the discovery of the 10 buildings, drainage tunnels, and many artefacts that weren't looted from earlier raids. Despite a lack of technology at the time, Child believed Skara Brae was a Neolithic settlement, but this wasn't proven until 1970 with the use of carbon dating. Today, Skara Brae is one of 4 UNESCO World Heritage Sites that form the heart of Neolithic Orkney, the others being Ness of Brodgar, Maes Howe, and Stennis Circle. If I can direct your attention to the map, you can see we have a tour guide avatar who will be our eyes and ears on this virtual tour. The map you are now seeing is an illustrated layout of Skara Brae today, with all walkways and railings removed. Each tile on our grid, although not a perfect scale, represents around a metre square. From this view, we can start to see how much work was needed to complete the structures. Through C14 dating, we know today that settlers arrived on Orkney around 3700 BC, but only started work at Skara Brae around 3180 BC. If we move to the south, we can see 2 smaller buildings, which represent phase 1 of its construction. It is theorized the settlers had to overcome major issues when starting such projects in this new land. First, as an island, Orkney lacked a woodland ecology, a fundamental resource of the Neolithic era and a key component in Neolithization. Instead, the settlers had to use resources that were available on Orkney, such was limited to turf, stone, sand, and whatever else they could harvest from animals. Second, soil samples taken from across Orkney tell us that the settlers brought livestock with them, which means that they had animal bone, meat, leather, and manure. Research conducted by Schulting and Borick in 2017 showed us that the land was fertilized by livestock manure at this period, but also was used in the construction of middens, or refuse heaps. These middens formed the base for Skara Brae and made its development possible. After a structural base was formed, the settlers carved out these middens to form the first 2 homes at Skara Brae, now known as rooms 9 and 10. They then supported these walls with flat stones, another resource available throughout Orkney due to its unique geology. By making the walls of stone, the settlers had created an almost permanent structure, which arguably is the most complete Neolithic village in Europe. Following the same logic of resource managing, it is believed the settlers constructed two stages of roofing at Skara Brae. First, they made a massive tarp of animal skins, held up by large ivory beams harvested from beached whales. Then, the settlers would cut turf from the nearby landscape and place them onto the tarps, creating a natural rooftop. Eventually, houses 9 and 10 were abandoned and used as spoilage heaps, but their design continued into new homes in Phase 2. This was believed to occur around 2900 BC. To demonstrate the sheer size of this, the tour has provided two extra maps, showing how large these tarps had to be and what the site may have looked like with rooftops. As you can see from these pictures, the process was so successful that later generations are believed to have continued the practice into Phase 2 of Skara Brae, even going so far as to roofing the passageways. Moving into the complex, we can see one clear passageway connecting the majority of the houses from Phase 2, meaning houses 1 to 8. The passage itself is windy and narrow, only being about a metre tall in places. It is believed the passage was designed this way to keep the wind out of the complex. The corridor also adds a disorientating effect as the lighting and eyesight is hindered by its turns and corners. Normally, we wouldn't be able to experience this for safety reasons, but with our virtual tour avatar, I can engage a lighting mode to demonstrate the lack of vision. As we can see, this creates an unnerving feeling to those who don't know the layout, which tells us that visitors to the island must have felt strange when first walking the paths. As described by Last, it's important for us to attempt to experience a place, as it helps us consider what the original people intended in its design. In this way, we can see that the inhabitants of Skara Brae had a deep sense of belonging to a place, ownership, and were perhaps distant to outsiders who were not usually from Skara Brae themselves. For the outsiders to Orkney, stone was thought to be associated to the dead and not the living, hence why other domestic structures of this time are believed to be constructed from wood, a living resource, as opposed to stone, furthering a confusion towards this building process and the nature of these houses. We now find ourselves at the entrance of the most preserved room in the complex, room number 1. As you can see on the map, it is square with round edges, a central hearth fire, 2 stone bed chambers, and iconic cabinets are also made from stone within these rooms. To better show what this room was like in its prime, the Skara Brae Visitor Centre built a historic recreation, which is pictured here. As we can see, it is believed the roof had a tarp ivory turf design as mentioned earlier. We can also see the postal stones at the foot of the beds had taller corners, which are believed to have had more animal hides draped across them to keep the heat in. It is also believed the beds were communal for the genders of the family, left for the women and right for the men. There are 8 rooms in total of this phase, and they average 36 metres square in size. Now that we have described the layout of the village, we can look at what interpretations have been made by its discovery. One of the major topics of Neolithic theory is the relationship between people and things. It is often noted a major contributor to Neolithization was the acquisition of things, be it new types of food, tools, or even ways of life like communal feasting. These things were not available without the Neolithic mentality of resource management, and therefore materials started to gain meaning for individuals, or better put, personal attachment to objects. In archaeology, we can only learn from what was left behind by people long since gone, and so what they choose to leave behind can potentially tell us much. This is shown at Skara Brae in the hearth design, as they differ over the 2 phases of construction. We can assume that this is not an accident, as the design is repeated for all 8 rooms of Phase 2, and in that design, we see how the light is used to highlight certain things over others. For example, In room 10, the cabinets are tall and to the side and throughout the room, but the fire would provide light in all of the shelving. If we move back to the cabinets in room 1, however, there are some compartments that cannot be lit by the fire, or were tall enough to obscure the objects at the back. This, as described by Jones in 2012, tells us that over the course of the late Neolithic, houses altered architecturally, which had a profound effect of illumination, as the edges of the furniture would offer altering planes of light and shadow in a house. Potentially, this means that as the settlers had access to more objects, they formed complex relationships with them, preferring some to be displayed and others to be hidden. From here, we can discuss some of the artifacts found at Skara Brae and speculate the meanings they held. As said earlier, we can only learn from what has remained on a site, therefore we can only base our theories on what has survived. It follows, therefore, that we can only learn from things that do not decompose, such as bone, stone, and other non-organic items. With that said, what has survived at Skara Brae are interesting carvings in the bed walls depicting a specific series of symbols, which we can see in this picture. Symbols used in such a way suggest a code or a language, as the Neolithic settlers created them to hold a specific meaning. This pattern, if repeated, implies the meaning was applied universally to it, so a symbol means one thing regardless of where it was carved by these people. These symbols are also found at the Stena Circle, which suggests a connection to the people who built both the village and the circle. What is so interesting about this is a site such as Stena Circle would have required many more people to build at the time, so others from outside Skara Brae's population were needed. So who were the other people constructing these Neolithic monuments? And is it possible that they were also from Orkney? If this is the case, why would they help other communities? Was there a broader sense of community at Orkney in the Neolithic? These are only some questions that the carvings create, and from there, certain theories arise. If we make our way west of the site, we see a room from Phase 2 with no beds, which suggests it had a purpose other than holding one family. There is also a lack of personal objects found here, like bone tools and decoration, which suggests multiple people would occupy the room, but not stay permanently. Combining the structure of the room, its differences, and a lack of domestic personality, it is theorized this was a marketplace of sorts, furthering the notion of an extended community on Orkney. This extended community theory can also be supported by the diet people had at Skara Brae. The food the villagers ate was significantly varied for the late Neolithic. Their foods included cereal grain from farming, deer from hunting, fish from the sea, occasional beached whales, and even rodents that occupied their homes. This level of sophistication in a diet suggests that many specialized workers in a group that traded to survive. For example, a fisherman wouldn't farm, bake, and hunt, and so they had to trade their managed resources. Such a complex society is highly debated in the archaeological community, as it would change what we know of the late Neolithic period. But with the evidence at Skara Brae and indeed the rest of Orkney, it is slowly becoming a popular theory. This sophisticated society would have had many benefits, a major one being leisure time spent on new ideas, such as an indoor plumbing system. If we make our way to the back of a room in the complex, we see a small alcove to the side. Each of the houses from this phase has one of these alcoves within them, and which holds a small tunnel that connects to a large one leading off into the sea. It is believed that these were indoor toilets that could wash away refuse from the house, a remarkable feat of Neolithic masonry. Such a project would not only have required time to build, but time to design, and potentially a large community effort to complete, further suggesting the presence of a mass organized group. Another sign that the people of Skara Brae had extra time compared to the rest of the Neolithic Europe is the presence of intricate objects that had no identifiable purpose. I am speaking, of course, about the carved stone balls associated with Neolithic sites. These carved balls have appeared in other northern sites such as Aberdeenshire and Newgrange in Ireland, and as described by Powell, their purpose is highly speculated. As we can see from the image here, they have been painstakingly carved with geometrical accuracy and smoothed to become perfectly spherical. In some cases, they have deep grooves becoming spiked in appearance. Whatever their design, they have been considered to have a number of purposes, from being tied together forming a bolus, to artistic right-to-speak orbs, even being seen as measuring apparatus. What matters is they represent a craftsmanship that required dedication and precision. The craftsmanship required a lifetime of skill and therefore free time from gathering food for survival. It is often assumed that such individuals would have been fed for their skills and respected for their craft, whatever purpose this trade had fulfilled. With such respect and exchange in service goods, we are left to wonder what life in this community was like, what was the structure of each household, and did it differ to others in Orkney? In answer to this, many theorists believe Skara Brae had an egalitarian way of life, meaning much like other communities developing at this time, there was no leadership caste or hierarchical elites. One form of evidence that supports this is the size of the rooms at Skara Brae. As mentioned earlier, the room's average size of 36 meters square. This means no room is significantly larger than another, even sharing the same access point, this long corridor we see here. Combined with what we discovered about specialized workers, it appears no one household was above another in social status at Skara Brae. A major contributor to this egalitarian theory is not just what we see at Skara Brae, but what we don't see. By this, we mean there is a lack of weapons and murders in the village. There are remains found on the site, 2 people buried in a wall in room 3, but they appear to have died from natural causes like arthritic issues, most likely caused from the low roofs in the corridors. But as stated, no tools designed to harm humans have ever been found at Skara Brae. Bone tools such as hammers made from antler or flint scrapers for meat are present, but nothing we associate with human injury, such as barbed arrowheads or daggers. So by this logic, Skara Brae is often believed to have been free of violence and oppression. There are counter-arguments to this, however, the greatest being the design of Room 7. If we move our tour guide to the room, we see it is similar to others with only 2 real exceptions. It can't be accessed from the main corridor, and its doorway is operated from the outside. Such a design tells us that the people who lived in Room 7 had no control of the door, effectively sealing them in until someone from the outside reopened the door. Such a room is often compared to a prison or a quarantine facility, as the occupants had their free will taken away, but the purpose of such a locking mechanism is still debatable. It is entirely possible that it was built as a rite of passage or used as a birthing chamber. Whatever the purpose, Room 7 is often used to prove or disprove the notion of an egalitarian way of life at Skara Brae. Our final topic is what prompted the abandonment of Skara Brae. It is believed by 2500 BC, villagers abandoned the settlement along with other sites across Orkney, such as the Ness of Brodgar. There are multiple theories as to why the community left, but most support the idea of progressive migration. At this time, it is believed that younger settlers would have chose to leave their homes in search of new lands to colonize, the prospect being a land to call their own and gain more resources. It was a high-risk endeavour, but often yielded a new settlement in some far-off lands from their point of origin. We see this through the diffusion of ideas and design in other Neolithic sites across the UK, such as how Stena Circle predates Stonehenge by nearly a millennia, suggesting it inspired the builders over time. We also know that the Neolithic period saw a rise in storms and a drop in temperature around Orkney. This we know through soil analysis and a lack of successful grain harvests recorded at different dates. Combine these factors of failing crops, destructive storms, and a lack of a younger generation on Orkney, it's easy to see how the site was eventually abandoned. With that said, the village was left, and over time the roofs caved in and were filled with sand and soil. Other sites at Orkney received a different treatment, however, such as the Ness of Brodgar, a large temple structure to the east of Skara Brae, was ritualistically destroyed by its creators as they left, and it is believed that they slaughtered cattle to hold an enormous feast. Then, they gathered the skeletal remains of all the cows in the centre of the rubble, leaving a skull carefully placed on the top of the heap. We are left to conclude on a strange note. Why was Skara Brae treated differently when the settlers left Orkney? Why did they destroy the communal meeting place at Ness of Brodgar and not the homes they lived in? It is possible that the settlers, although united by a megalithic project, had different practices at home. Or perhaps a home was to be treated differently to a communal meeting place. Regardless of the answers, what matters is the decisions of the Orkney settlers have allowed us to rediscover Skara Brae today. As a result of those decisions, the homes have given us a glimpse into a unique Neolithic lifestyle, and almost certainly continue to be the base of many theories when it comes to the topic of the late Neolithic age.